respects and thanks to both Radhanath Maharaj and Professor Haberman for giving us this opportunity. Gauranga Prabhu somehow has given the mic to me, so I'm going to ask the first question here. The question is actually very simple, but crucial for our work here, which is that there are many intelligent people in ISKCON, many very, very qualified persons in the Vaishnav community more broadly, who could very easily succeed at doing a PhD in religious studies or in theology. My question is, who should and why should they? Just because someone can doesn't necessarily mean they should. What are the right reasons to pursue a higher degree in the field of Vaishnav studies or religious studies or theology? The question is about motivation. What should be the motivation?
I could speak something in relation to ISKCON. You could speak about being a PhD and why. In ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada had a very broad spectrum way of spreading Lord Chaitanya's movement of pure bhakti. Began with just getting people to enjoy prasad, and gradually the holy names, and then gradually the philosophy. And then that expanded into making little magazines. Arundhati Devi is with us. She was there almost from the very, very beginning, mimeographing back to Godheads. And then it became published back to Godheads, distribution. And gradually opening little storefronts, opening temples. And over the years, we have deity worship ministries where people seriously study deity worship for our temples. We have the Bhaktivedanta Institute, where people who are inclined towards science have gotten PhDs and involve themselves in addressing Krishna consciousness from a perspective of science. And Srila Prabhupada was trying to reach out to politicians. In India, he was especially reaching out to corporate people. You know, the life membership program was people from business, corporations, entertainment. The Vaikuntha Players was one of Prabhupada's favorite projects. It was people who were inclined toward entertainment, performance, drama, music. And Srila Prabhupada did encourage devotees who were inclined, had the capacity to continue their studies. For instance, Rabindra Swarup Prabhu, Sadhaputa Prabhu, encouraged them to go ahead and get PhDs. So in the academic field of religious studies, I was recently listening to tapes of Srila Prabhupada 1977 in Bhuvaneshwar. The joy that Prabhupada was experiencing and the encouragement and emphasis he was giving on getting the scholars to give good endorsements to his books. Rameshwar Prabhu was reading letter after a letter from Professor O'Connell and Professor Sharma and so many different professors. Dozens and dozens. And Prabhupada just wanted to keep hearing more and more. That means he wanted religious scholars to appreciate our movement. It was an emphasis. So obviously Srila Prabhupada wanted our devotees to also be religious scholars who could promote pure bhakti. So what type of person would be the right person to do this? What would be the impetus? Especially in India, and I believe all over the world, but we're kind of focusing India for this conference. There are many young people who are in studies, many in engineering, medicine, commerce. That's what most people study, simply because the motivation in India of studies is simply financial. There's not much ideology. It's survival. But while they're in their studies, thousands are becoming devotees. So people who have graduated, they may be Brahmacharis, they may be Grihasta, but I believe, especially people who are in their studies, who have become devotees, to open the door. There's a university now of Vaishnava studies. You could fit right in. Because a lot of people, they get their engineering degrees and they don't really want to be engineers. There's a lot of those people in our brahmachari ashram. Probably 80% of our brahmachari ashram has engineering degrees. And the remainder, some of them have medical degrees. But because now they're devotees, they have the training in academics, they have the potential and the propensity toward deep absorption in studies, and now they want to spread Krishna consciousness. And they could make a living too, because, what to speak of other universities and other colleges throughout India and the world, we also have our own, if we establish it. And I believe this is a great impetus. You could establish the message of pure devotional service in the pure Vaishnava line in the academic world, which will have reverberations throughout the planet for generations to come. And you can do it in the association of not only local devotees, but senior, most exemplary devotees like Radhika Raman Prabhu, Pranama Prabhu, Krishna Kshetra Maharaj. These types of devotees, in learning from them, getting a PhD degree, doors opening to spread Krishna consciousness through this very, very powerful format. I believe there will be many. I don't think there's going to be many until we establish something, because it's hard to give people faith in an idea, especially when it comes to your livelihood and all of that. Once we actually establish it, and establish it in a professional way, in an academic way, because these people they know academics, there will be more and more. Yes, it fits right in. It's like the next step. You go to college for a very mundane reason. You become a devotee in college. You want to know what to do with your life. You may want to get married. You need a profession. And here, as powerful as the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which Srila Prabhupada gave maximum emphasis to, will be Vaishnava studies in the fields of theology, religion, philosophy. So if we, as a group, and what I see is such like-minded people have come together here. And where like-minded people have a divine idea and the willingness to make sacrifice for it, Krishna empowers. So if we're persistent in our unity and our determination, I'm sure it will be a glorious offering to Krishna, to humanity, to the world.
I'm not sure how I've found myself sitting up here beside Maharajji, but I am so delighted to be in this position. And mainly I want to hear from Maharajji because I've said to many people, I want to make sure that we are not going forward with anything that you aren't fully on board with. And it seems as though we feel your support throughout what a great deal of what we have done during this conference. There are many religious leaders in the world today, but not all of them would be as welcoming to the kind of the big vision that has been cooked up here, and particularly that inclusive characteristic of religious studies. So I don't think it's any accident that we're having this conversation here. You've created a nest for the creation of what I think excites many of us, and thank you for that. I'll add a few words, and there'll be more from the drier academic side of things. But I do find myself in a position of talking with undergraduate students who are considering going on in a career in religious studies. And what I tell them is that karma is a very complicated feature in human existence. It certainly can be very, very troublous. And there, in Indian traditions, is an understanding of karma as being precisely that. Some see it as the enemy of spirituality altogether. And yet, one of the features that is shared by all the Braj Vaishnava traditions is an understanding that karma, if treated in the right way, can be utilized as a very powerful component of spirituality. And therefore, it's perhaps much too valuable just to be cast aside. But it does have to be worked with, and it does have to be transformed. So I tell them that it's really a matter of calm. That is, that to finish a PhD takes a lot of work and requires the investment of a lot of time. And what will carry you through that journey is passion. Your own passion. And we know again that calm, the whole idea, calm is there in karmanuga or karma-atmika bhakti. So again, there's a kind of a root. But in the human efforts, we know that calm, if worked with, if elevated, can be transformed into prem. And I think that's finally what's at the core of our vision here. Maharajji has talked about the kind of social benefits, and so it does require a commitment to a seva that will be extremely valuable to society. But for the individual, it is a matter of calm, and working with that calm to make sure that one finally is performing that seva.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Maharaj, whilst you said that religious studies could be an option, even from a livelihood perspective for grahasthas and for students who are pursuing the non-ashram life, what would be your recommendation for brahmacharis? What should be the mood if they would like to pursue a PhD in religious studies?
What we've been discussing last few days, this, what is it called? Srila Prabhupada. What is the name? Srila Prabhupada University. If the environment is proper, it awakens within people's minds and hearts enthusiasm that they may not pay attention to otherwise. So there are students as well as brahmacharis, of course, who may have a very academic inclination and potential, and they really want to do something. And we see here at Govardhan Eco Village, the Bhaktivedanta Vidyapitha is an example of that. Radhanath, brahmacharis who may be involved there, same. At the Oxford Sonak Rishi Prabhu's project, there has been brahmacharis who have been there. But what concerns brahmacharis is the association. You know, are they going to be going to a university, you know, in order to go into religious studies where they're learning from atheistic people, agnostic people, people who are very unfavorable to God, what to speak of Krishna and deity worship, and the students around them, you know, the atmosphere. It's not a brahmachari environment, especially people who have been trained to some degree in a very disciplined brahmachari ashram. But this Srila Prabhupada University could be something that's totally accommodating, because they'll be with their major professors are going to be sincere, dedicated Vaishnavas who are even their seniors in Krishna consciousness. And the other students are people who are actually sincere, and they see it's value-based. The university itself, in that sense, will be an ashram environment. It's not that they're leaving the ashram. The ashram is being extended. So I believe the major reason that discourages people will be removed, because there will be satsang, there will be association. And although they may be studying various religions and various aspects of Hinduism, it's not going to be antagonistic toward their own faith. It's going to be complementary to their own faith. In that sense, I believe brahmacharis could feel protected, enthused, and empowered. Because I've discussed over the years brahmacharis to some, what would you think of going to Oxford or going like that? How could a Brahman, what kind of ashram is there? Here they could more or less stay in the ashram and do their studies. Because brahmacharya is, staying a brahmachari is as hard as getting a PhD. For many, it's even harder. So there needs to be it needs to be complementary, and the Srila Prabhupada University is, I believe, very complementary. If they really have an incredible opportunity to engage their intellectual propensities with something they really feel is meaningful, will help their brahmachari too. They'll be absorbed. And in certain ways, it's closer to the traditional brahmachari ashram. Menial service is very important. As my talk, I don't know if I got the point across, but in my keynote address, the mood and the mission of Vaishnava studies really is in the lineage of the great saints to go deep into, for the purpose of purification and for the purpose of being an instrument of the compassion of the Parampara and Krishna. But in order to do that, we have to have the culture of a menial servant. So the ashram gives them that. But then the deep study of Shastra and the deep study of the essence of religion is very much traditionally what people do in brahmachari ashrams. They study. Would you like to speak something?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Hare Krishna Premdasi. Thank you for setting the mood. One of the points which came in our discussion was we were reviewing the composition of several universities which provide religious programs. There is on one end a seminary model where the faculties, students, staff must be of a particular faith. Then on the other hand, we have universities like BYU, Brigham Young University, where faculties are of faith, but the students are required just to follow the regulative principles. They may not be of a particular faith. And then there are shades of grey in the middle. We want to know, learn from you, what do you think can be an ideal composition of Srila Prabhupada University, so that the mood is maintained, as well as those who are eager to learn, even they may not be of that same faith, are welcomed. But still, the ethos is maintained.
It's difficult for me too. I think that's what all of you are discussing. And I think the answer to that question will emerge by Krishna's grace in time. But initially, and these are just thoughts, these not necessarily a direction, there should be a pure environment with values that are expected of students. That's very important. And I believe it should be accommodating for both our devotees and people who really want to make the study and are willing to live by certain values. At least especially on the campus. But through your discussions with your experiences in colleges and universities, as I said, I went to one semester of a junior college, and there were 50,000 students on the campus, and I never met anyone who was there to study. They were there to socialize or try to get out of the draft where they get sent to Vietnam, or girls who wanted to find a boy who was trying to resist the draft. But anyways, I'm not so experienced in how universities work, but I've spoken in hundreds and hundreds of universities, and I see that there's such a great opportunity. Can I tell a little of my history? I don't want to go into details, but I was kind of kicked out of New Vrindavan. And I didn't know what to do. I was just told, go out and preach. I was alone, and I had no money, and I had no vehicle, and it was the winter, and it was snowing. So how am I supposed to preach? I've been a pujari for 10 years, taking care of cows in a mountain. So I asked some people to find me some instructions from Prabhupada of how to preach. So I got 2 letters of Prabhupada. And they were both about college preaching. And one letter, it was to a devotee who was, I think, in Seattle, who was going to colleges. Srila Prabhupada said, the people in the colleges today are the leaders of the entire world tomorrow. If we do not impress them in Krishna consciousness, our movement does not have a future. That's quite emphatic, how important college preaching is. And then he told how to do it. He wrote, if you tell an intelligent college student that our philosophy or we are better than you, then they will not listen to you. Just try to explain our teachings in such a nice way that they come to that conclusion by their own intelligence. And then he wrote that just giving a lecture is nice, but people's hearts change when we provide them regular association. So basically, those were the only letters I could get, because there were no letter books. This was 1979. There was no internet, and there was no database. So my entire life was just based on following those, what I just said, those simple instructions. And to this day, that's still all I'm doing. I came to India by some inconceivable way, and I knew how to do deity worship, and I knew how to milk cows, and I knew how to do college outreach. And we had no deities, and we had no cows, so we just started going to the colleges. And that's kind of how everything happened. So the integration within the colleges is something that could have a very, very powerful effect. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess, again, looking at things from an academic perspective, every college and university has a student conduct code, everyone. And in some sense, that's really what you're talking about. At my university, that certainly includes academic student conduct, but it also includes conduct between students. And there's a lot of attention, particularly on that latter in universities these days. So every higher educational institution has student conduct codes. The question is then, how would those be articulated for Srila Prabhupada University? And every university and college does it differently. And I think religious institutions tend to be a little more, I don't know, let's say refined or clearer. Maybe the parameters are set more than a big state university such as I teach within. And that's really the privilege of the particular institution to determine that. And you've laid out 2 different options. I mean, we could have gone, Brigham Young University actually is a religious institution. and the faculty there are Mormons, right? And so that the spectrum is wider than that. But I think that's really the question then, how to articulate a Vaishnav student code of conduct that is both wide enough to attract serious students who could learn a great deal from learning about a Vaishnava perspective on things, and yet not so wide that those values are lost.
I had an observation with respect to libraries. I visited Oxford and few other campuses in the West, and I've seen that not only in educational institutions but also in cities, the public libraries are very well maintained, established. And in India, when I go across to all the traditional temples, so just like some of the top churches in Europe and London, there is a very well established library right next to the church. But I don't see the same in India. So was it because they would depend on the memory, because previously all the Vedic text was held within the memory power? For some reason, though, when you refer to libraries in India, you only refer to Nalanda, Takshashila, and beyond that there doesn't seem to be any reference of any ancient very well established libraries or even in modern times. So since we are now in this approach to academic studies, so I had these two questions. One is, what could be the reason why the library culture is not so strong in India, as well established as the temple culture? And number two is, moving forward, if BRC in India has to become the vehicle and facilitator for creating a library revolution in India, how can that be done?
Well, this is an important question for doing scholarship in India. I must say that as a scholar in India, one of the most frustrating components of it is library access. It's very difficult in many situations to even get access to the books. And if you get access to the books, checking a book out is impossible. And even copying a book. So when I was doing my study of Bhaktivedanta Sindhu, I was looking at texts that were composed in the same time that I thought would be useful for me interpreting the system of Raganaga Bhakti Sadhana. And I discovered a book by the name of the Raganaga Vritti. And I actually, through rather difficult means, could discover that text in the Vrindavan Research Institute when it was in its older place. But then I wanted a copy of it so that I could take it and read the Sanskrit in a more leisurely pace than I could do just coming there every day. And I would have never, ever gotten access to that text to copy it. And in those days, it meant actually photographing each page, except for the help of my dear friend Srivatsa Swami, who arranged that for me. So I'm giving it a personal account. But one of the great tragedies, I think, going on in India, there are temple manuscript collections, but so many of them that I visit, the texts are falling apart. And these are valuable texts that are just being wasted, and yet they're guarded. Many temple manuscript collections you can't even get access to. And I think some of that, India's coming out of the colonial period, and some of that is a fear of what is done with those. Some of those libraries were destroyed intentionally. So I think we just have to realize at the historical moment that we're living in an era where these were problematic areas for, I think, good reasons. But let's move beyond that. And I think a library revolution is absolutely necessary. And I'm not sure what the key to bringing that about, but it is necessary for the scholastic work that we're talking about and the work at the BRC library. I think that those are amazing stories. That's excellent, excellent work that will be so valuable to future scholars. Needs to be done more. a lot of resources are available online, but again, if the manuscripts that are sitting there are not fed into that, then that's difficult. And I must say, I said a little earlier in the day that things seem to grow out of the ground very quickly here. In our academic discussion, we talked about the importance of JSTOR and having access to JSTOR. I could hardly survive today as a scholar without that. JSTOR is an online source that gives you access really to articles in so many journals. You just type in a subject and you have many articles at your hand that you can read. And we talked about how valuable that would be. And Gauranga Das listened with great interest. He got up and disappeared for a few moments and came back and said, "We now have JSTOR."
The concepts of libraries probably originated in India. Ramanujacharya, these Madhvacharya, they wrote, they had so many scriptures at their disposal. We read in Bhaktiratnakar that Sanatana Goswami and Ramkeli had a great library of Vedic literatures, and he brought them to Vrindavan. And at the Radha Damodar temple, there was Jiva Goswami developed a wonderful library, and it lasted for centuries. But somehow or other, it wasn't really under a large institution. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, some of his followers developed great libraries, but it ended up just in families. And after generations, whether it's Goswami families or scholar-disciple families, the descendants who helped to develop the libraries really didn't care about it. They were happy to sell for any money they could get, whatever manuscripts they were. Or they just let it get eaten by those little worms, because they really didn't care and they didn't know. So the libraries of Vedic literatures, Vaishnava literatures, religious literatures in India, that culture requires a revival. It's been there. There's so many histories of great libraries in the Vaishnava schools, but it's dissipated because of lack of care, lack of control. And if there is actually an establishment of a university where it's not just under a family and the descendants of the family, it could be developed and preserved and expanded. It could create a revival throughout India of actual religious studies libraries. Obviously, when the Mughals came to India, they were not interested in supporting Vaishnava libraries. And the British were trying to fill the libraries with their own information, which was, to a large extent, to convert Vaishnavas to their own faith. So there wasn't protection. So it's important it's revived. What Pranava Prabhu and Harisari Prabhu, Gauranga Prabhu, and Sumatra Prabhu, what you're doing in Premdas Ji in Calcutta, I think that's invaluable. It's historical. It's foundational to education in Vaishnava studies. And here, the Srila Prabhupada University is so intimately connected with the BVRC in Calcutta. It's a great blessing.
It was very moving to and very exciting to see the welcoming mood that we experienced these days, the wonderful discussions, the electrifying enthusiasm. So we are all very much inspired, and we look really toward a bright future. So I had a question, because the BVRC grows naturally within a certain institutional environment within ISKCON. And religious studies in ISKCON, the way that we are developing it here in connection with Mumbai University, is still relatively new. In fact, this is a new development. So my question was, Maharaj, do you see any kind of things that we should be aware of, any kind of possible constraints or any kind of possible points that we should remember to respect the fact that we are affiliated to a religious institution? Anything that you can think of that would be valuable for us to remember and to kind of be conscious of, that we have a relationship with a certain religious institution that we need to respect while trying to maintain a certain kind of academic integrity of some kind. Anything you can think of?
If we call it Srila Prabhupada University, we have to do it the way Srila Prabhupada would want it. If you put something in a person's name, it has to embody the person's spirit. So our presentation of Vaishnavism should be authentic, rooted in the parampara, the great lineage of true acharyas. And when we're speaking of other faiths, we should be understanding the essence of that faith in such a way that those who are Vaishnavas studying can see how it's complementary. And when we're dealing with opposing views, again, there's that dialogue, but the foundation should be very strongly in the authentic teachings and the authentic ways of either countering or understanding apparently opposing views. And I think it's also very important that people who are invited to teach here are people who have no history of antagonism or being unfavorable. Whatever their scholarship should be, they should be well-wishers to Srila Prabhupada and our cause.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I would have to add to that in ways, except I told Ferdinand just here a few moments ago, because I understand we're going to lose you soon, but I feel like I've really been here as part of a Trimurti. Now I'll let everyone decide who's who in that Trimurti, but I think that my two colleagues in that Trimurti are already exemplary figures. You two are doing that. To hear Ravi speak of religious studies, he could speak of that way. Ravi is now the director, really what's the equivalent of a chair of a religious studies department in a state university. It's going to be the only state university religious studies program in the state of Utah where he is teaching. And to hear him speak, he sounds like he's solidly in religious studies. And yet he is one who is very committed to the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. So I think that the two of you are already models of what you're asking for. And I think that's it. That is that someone who is educated into, literate with, and in some sense really understands and accepts the principles of what is called religious studies, and yet is committed to your faith tradition. I think that's really the model of what we're talking about. And if it didn't exist, I would worry about the creation of it. But to a certain degree, I would say it already exists in such figures. And you know you're not alone, and we could add to that list. So functioning today, I know the American Academy best, there are a number of scholars who are well-respected scholars of religious studies, and who are members of ISKCON. To flip that, just because I want to say that when one is operating in the field of religious studies, there are scholars who are dedicated Christians who I think do a fair job, very fair job, at representing Hinduism. And we talk about Frank Clooney, who is a Jesuit priest, very committed, right? Jesuit priest, and yet has written wonderful books on the Sri Vaishnava tradition. And to me, that's some of the beauty what religious studies has to offer. And I think it then can augment, and I think the two of you would agree, that it augments even finally your understanding of religion and religions, but in a manner that certainly doesn't really undermine your faith, but augments it in interesting ways.
Hare Krishna. Most of the time what happens after the happening of such kind of conferences, we come out with conclusion of the conferences, we publish in newspaper, and we give it to the government and authorities so they can look into these things. So are we going to publish the outcome of this international conference, and are we going to contact some authorities at national and international level so that it can help us to make this religious studies in India happening? This is what my question is.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that I have learned in this conference, and I suppose I already knew as being a chairman of the department, is how to delegate. And I've learned about, I'm a 15-second delegation. And so now I'm looking in the direction of Gurangaji. And because that's a question that we haven't really talked about in any way, but it's a valid question.
I think we are open to that idea, because we began with a very broad idea of what we are going to do, but seeing today morning's presentations, I'm very, very delighted that what outcome we have come up with is much higher than what I expected in the beginning of the conference. So since you are heading the admin team, maybe you are the man who can take and lead us in that direction, and we have the scholars and the others to give support to that vision, and I think we can take it forward.
Just in terms of publication and dissemination, I think at this stage it would be important to convey and disseminate the results of our work to specific targeted persons who would be potential supporters and partners in our process, and not to try too hard for a wide public dissemination. I think it's very important that we have something to show, something of quality that we have offered and given before we promote, because otherwise there are many academic projects around the world that begin with a big bang, and then 10 years down the road, no one knows what happened to them. And so people tend to be, especially in the academic world, but also in general, I think, intelligent people tend to be skeptical about promotion activities that have not yet produced results. So I think once we have our first two batches of good PhD graduates who can come together and produce good publications and conference seminars, we'll be in a position for wide public dissemination. But at the same time, I agree this resource is very useful for targeted dissemination to people who are potential partners in our work.
I might not be in a position to really speak, but I just have one little question. When you're talking about Vaishnavism as a whole, there are different types, like there are various kinds of Vaishnavism. So if we have a kind of a curriculum based on one type of Vaishnavism, how will we inculcate all the other types, and how are we going to tell the students maybe whose families are following different types to actually come and learn Vaishnavism if they're interested? And how will we actually, make a proper curriculum where everybody will be interested in learning what they want to?
Again, we should present authentic teachings. There's Sri Vaishnavism, there's the Rudra Sampradaya, Sripad Vallabhacharya's line, Gaudiya Sampradaya, the Brahma Sampradaya, the Kumar Sampradaya, Nimbark Sampradaya. We should present them according to the authentic version of the Acharyas, Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. And it would be wonderful to see the various Vaishnava Sampradayas actually coming together as a family, sharing what we have in common, understanding deeper from each other. Does that answer your question? This morning we heard a wonderful class and we were in rapt attention, being enlightened by Prem Das Ji, Dr. David Haberman, who is in the line of Sripad Vallabhacharya speaking about Shri Giriraj Govardhan, where the major text is Srimad Bhagavatam for both of us. And it was just a sharing of the treasures of our traditions with each other. That was beautiful.
So thank you very much, Prem Das Ji, Maharaj, for sharing your valuable wisdom. I think, we began in an amazing manner with the presentations by the scholars, and we are ending in a really glorious note with such crystal clear wisdom for all the questions being raised. And we look forward for an ongoing dialogue. We have now identified these three areas, one of the academic research, one of administration, one of outreach, and we have very able facilitators leading each one of these tracks, and I'm sure they'll keep things together as the journey progresses. And what began a couple of years ago with a visit by Dr. David Haberman here for maybe a week or so, and there was just a brief informal conversation in the same Yoga Shala eating area between Dr. Sumanta, him and myself on the idea of a conference. So that resulted in a conference organized by Yale, completely, spearheaded and put together by Dr. Haberman. And then, in the course of these couple of years, we have also managed to bring together the scholars in the Vaishnava philosophy. And this year, we had absolutely no idea what would be the details of this interaction and dialogue, but we are all quite delighted with what we have accomplished. It was Matchitta Madgata Prana Bodhyanta Parasparam. And we were really enjoying this conversation over the last 4 days. And I'm sure that in the months to come, we are going to see many more wonderful things emerging. I was just having a conversation with Harivamsha Prabhu, and he's feeling more and more inspired to kind of look at working on this full time and be in immersion mode. And we are begun a conversation in that direction because we would need some key people to drive this, because we could see the impact Balram Lila Prabhu created in the BVRC Kolkata from the time he started really giving quality time and attention. And so I think gradually we are having traction with Balram Lila Prabhu, Harivamsha Prabhu and others coming forward. And with the guidance of Dr. Ferdinando, Dr. Ravi Gupta and Dr. David, I'm sure this nucleus of enthusiastic, future scholars stepping forward would grow. And in India, we would see a revolution and the creation of, hopefully, the Indian Academy of Religion. On that auspicious note, I would request all of us to go to the Goshala for Go Seva and Dr. Ravi Gupta.
So I know Gauranga Prabhu is playing the role of host and therefore thanking everyone, but I think for those of us who have been hosted here, I think a very, very warm thank you is due to Gauranga Prabhu for his vision and his skill in bringing us together.